All right, good afternoon, everyone. We work session today is for the Salisbury City Council. Today is Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. There was a slight change on the agenda. Typically, we don't do public comments during the work session, and today we do not have any intention of doing that today. This is just a discussion on the labor code. So we'll go ahead and get started. See how we proceed, because this was tabled, so we are now bringing it back for discussion again. The administration has sent forth the same original code, and I'll start with Ashley. If you have anything, if you want to discuss anything.
No, I think you're correct procedurally. What you have before you is what we were discussing back maybe March, April timeframe before it was tabled. I understand that there was some input and then also some input today. So I feel like at this point we should defer to the representatives here, and then you can hear from them and we can proceed accordingly. Because right now the draft is the same, so if there are going to be changes, I think you guys need to hear potentially what they will be, and we can move forward from there.
Were you able to review?
I have,
okay.
Yes.
All right. And I think we had Sabila from ASME. She on the...
Oh. Yeah, hi. I think that your audio is just like a little bit spotty. So I don't know if there's a specific question, but do you want me to just chat a little bit about some of the amendments that we sent over to council members?
Yes. Can you hear me? I don't... Where's the audio?
It's right here.
Well,
It's right.
Oh,
here.
okay.
What?
All right.
is that public comment? I mean, what? I'm
For the
confused.
presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So she's gonna discuss what she sent to us earlier today. Some suggested changes to the code that the city has. So Sabila, you have the floor.
I see. Thank you.
I don't know if it's you or me, but it is a little bit spotty. I'm going to kick it to David because he's in the room. Maybe that would be easier.
That was a good one.
Teamwork. That's fine.
If you want to sit at the end of the table there,
Sit in the hot seat.
Okay.
She set you up, didn't she?
That's fine. Hi, it's nice to meet everybody in the room. Many familiar faces, clients, old friends, new friends, everybody else. I've met some of the council folks. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Wright. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Consmith and Collins in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been there for 13 years, and we represent IAFF locals throughout the state. I have the pleasure of representing Baltimore City's rank and file firefighters, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel, and just down the street here in Ocean City as well. We also have the pleasure of representing AFSCME Maryland, and formerly AFSCME Council 67. And we've done a lot of work with them, both in the state of Maryland and for all the municipalities they represent, be it Baltimore City and Tacoma Park and Hagerstown and all over the state of Maryland, in small towns, in big counties, in school boards, or wherever else. So public sector labor law is kind of my thing. It's what I spend probably 80% of my time doing, and proud to do so. And proud to be down here helping get this moved ahead. This came to my attention more than a year ago when the IAFF was in communications with the mayor about having collective bargaining with interest arbitration, which is the good modern system of having employees engaged and having them have the capacity to kind of speak up in the workplace, address their wages, address their working conditions, address all the things that matter to them. It's become quite common in Maryland. I mean, Maryland, honestly, was behind for many years, kind of a bit of a southern state, but we've moved over the years towards having more collective bargaining. At this point, it's really quite stable, and there's a good pattern set about how it works and how it functions and how it keeps everybody in this room sort of moving forward and gives you all a way to hear from employees and a way to problem solve. So, charter amendment, of course, got passed. kudos to the team that did that, some of whom have moved on to other things. That was great. That set up the fact that we now need a labor code that has all the details, and your council, COUNSEL, worked on a labor code to have all the details about how do you know that the firefighters represent a majority of employees? How do you know that ASME represents a majority of employees? There needs to be a process for that. And then when you actually bargain, how do you bargain? What's the timeline? What are the subjects of bargaining? And what do you do if there's conflict? So that's kind of the whole universe of things. We had offered to kind of model things on some different jurisdictions, and you all have adopted many of the kind of standard forms, but there are some deviations that concern the labor participants in this room. I shouldn't leave out the FOP, who I don't speak for, but are in here certainly, and who we've coordinated with. So the goal today is try to get the labor code in a place where everybody can be satisfied and get this thing done, because it's time to move from the lawmaking stage to the bargaining stage. So the amendments today are focused on a number of things to kind of pull this into the mainstream in ways that we feel like need to happen, having had lots of roundtables with the different stakeholders and looking at different labor codes throughout Maryland. Does everybody have a copy of the amendments? I don't know if I assume they were circulated internally. Okay. So, some of these, if Sabila was talking, they're cleanups from her. Some of them are kind of the top tier things that have been most discussed. And let me just kind of walk through a few of them. On page 1, there's an effort to kind of drill down on what it means to be a management employee, because there's a pretty set definition in the labor relations world about what it means to be a management employee, what kind of powers you have to have. And the language that is added there, this includes having the authority to exercise independent judgment in the interest of the employer to hire, transfer, suspend, lay off, recall, promote, discharge, or discipline other employees, or having the responsibility to adjust the grievance or effectively to recommend such an action if it is not routine or clerical nature but requires the use of independent judgment. That's kind of a stock what it means to be a manager. You're a problem solver. You have power to say this could go this way or that way. It's going to go that way. That bit of clarity is needed. The second amendment, lines 96 to 98, this is kind of very important, and it's been talked about a few times about where you draw the line in public safety in particular between management employees and non-management employees. So those are rank structured places. The general employees, you know a manager when you see a manager because they have those powers that we just described. But in the police department and the fire department, you know based on rank who has the power. So we've reworded this to have captains be in the unit in the fire department because they don't make those big decisions. They are coordinating those below them in rank, but they're not managers, as that term is known. Same with lieutenants in the police department. So that brings those individuals, and that's traditional in Baltimore City. Actually, in Baltimore County, they certainly go through captain in their rank for who's in the unit. In Baltimore City, they actually have a unit that's expressly for fire officers. In Anne Arundel, it goes through captains as well. So it's really the standard. I think if you look at Prince George's and anywhere else, it's always through those first couple levels of officers, and then it pauses before you get to the deputy or assistant chief kind of level. I'll say the same is true of police, although I know police a little less. 196 and 198, the edit there is to make very clear that this is a workplace where to have your career with Salisbury ended or to have a week of pay taken from you as a disciplinary measure takes just cause. It means there needs to be a reason. Quite standard, typical in all collective bargaining agreements and most labor codes that City of Salisbury is rational. If you've done wrong, they're going to show that you've done wrong and there's going to be a consequence to it, but otherwise there's not arbitrary decisions. The third edit is the one that has caused a lot of discussion. It's been kind of a sticking point at times, but this gets it done. They're in 232 to 240. So collective bargaining is been around since, well, in the federal and private sector for about 90 years at this point. What it always means, what's in my blood and in my mind and what I can't ever shake is that collective bargaining covers wages, hours, and other terms and conditions of employment. So that means, what do people care about when they are working for the city of Salisbury or Baltimore County or wherever they might be working? They care about that they can make a living. They care about the fact that they can arrange their family and their lives around set hours that make sense. And then, honestly, there's scores of other topics that are more than one can even speak to. It might be vacations, it might be safety issues, it might be pension issues, it might be the uniform you wear, it might be the grievance process itself, how things are resolved, it's who's in the unit and who's not. It's more things than you could ever list. I've tried to list them. It's a unpleasant task to try to cover it all. And so within the private sector and in the public sector, that's a term of art, other terms and conditions of employment. Management certainly has its rights. So this does not cover everything, right? The city of Salisbury has to set a budget. That's the city of Salisbury's business. The city of Salisbury has to make sure that people's lives get saved. That's the city of Salisbury's business. But there are other terms and conditions of employment that, again, are more than I can list, but wind up being 30, 40, 50, 60-page contracts in a fire department that they're just all the things. They're just, drug testing, health insurance, although we've excluded health insurance. Why? Because that is something that the employees here understand it's a good benefit, it's a stable benefit, it doesn't need to be negotiated. It's not typically negotiated these days because of the complexities. So that's been carved out in this language, but otherwise, that gets the sphere of topics covered. The next page, we kind of move to more cleanup-y kinds of things. The top of page 2, which is E, mine's 242, 252, kind of matches what I just explained about sort of the scope. You ought to, and one of the things to keep in mind is the scope of bargaining varies with each employee group. Firefighters care about things different from highway workers or public works workers, and they care about different things than police. A lot of these things that come in, what the city's been doing is going to be fine. What matters in any given workplace depends on the management, depends on where there have been sticking points, where there have been problems, whatever the case might be. So anything that arises at the table that's an appropriate topic, you ought to talk about. Everything here is about facilitating conversation and resolution. Still on page 2, this talked about having a collective bargaining agreement.
What? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The standard for a collective bargaining agreement is always to have it be at least 1 year, 2 years, and maybe 3 years is more standard. This goes 1 or 2 years. 2 years is stability. 3 years is even better, but 2 years gives you stability, so you negotiate a contract, and then you stand down for a couple of years. Gives you labor peace, gives you continuity. Retroactivity is struck in there. There's a prohibition on retroactivity. Retroactivity just happens. Things take the time that they take, and then if you run past when a wage needs to be increased or whatever the case might be, you pay retro. It just happens. It's not a bugaboo. To try to have, honestly, it's a priority of mine these days to always have things be prospective because it's easier in this world. Lines 267, 269. This is about the recognition process. We don't need particular timelines about when that happens. I think we're on track that maybe this labor code gets done and we have recognition before September 1, but I don't know how this process is going to play out. But if the IFF or AFSCME is working on collecting cards that demonstrate that the employees support the union, those should be acceptable whenever. There's no particular timeline there. And again, that takes the time it takes. AFSCME is working with employees right now to get them to determine whether they want to support the union or not. That'll take the time it takes. The IFF is doing the same. The FOP is doing the same. Lines 281 to 289. Good to have that step of the process, the voluntary recognition process, carried out by the FMCS. That's a way to get a refund on your taxes. The FMCS is a federally supported labor relations group that does all sorts of card checks and mediations and different things. and they're cheap, honestly. Cost matters, and so using the FMCS to do that, they are neutral, they are affordable. They come in, and what they do is, if there are 150 firefighters, you got to have 76 of them present cards that say, we want to have this union represent us. You're going to employ a person who's going to sit there neutrally and say, that's a good card, that's a good card, that's a good card. They get through. Simple, fair, very standard. Page 3 is about, what the union cares most about is when any given employee has an issue, or when the union has an issue, being able to have a process for things to be heard. The more things that are subject to the process, the better off they are. So this expands what's subject to arbitration to issues that are raised by the union potentially, and includes those topics that are covered by the employee handbook. And a grievance process is a way for an employee or a union to say, oh, wait a second, you're not carrying out overtime the way we've agreed to, or you're not paying the weekend premium the way you've agreed to, and then you have usually a couple meetings about it. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, or get it resolved, and that's that. It's usually just dispute resolution, and you negotiate that dispute resolution process. Lines 441, 447, similar to what I was just talking about. The kind of consensus view is, if you're going to have things, this is about the interest arbitration process. Just pick one from FMCS. They are, again, very affordable, very adept at this. They can give the list of arbitrators rather than having a variety that can change from cycle to cycle. 471, 472, there was a language to have interest arbitration, which is the way to kind of resolve when bargaining kind of goes a little sideways. You have an interest arbitration, and somebody comes in to say, if the union's at a 3% wage increase and the union's at a 5% increase, which one is more fair? That was boxed into kind of 4 hours. You don't need to be 4 hours. These things take the time that they take. Tonight's meeting takes the time it takes. Things take the time they take. Honestly, the meter is always running on those things, and trust me, the union feels the pinch more than the city does on how long any arbitration takes. On the kind of the window for negotiating, the typical thing is to try to make it fit with the budget cycle, and so this moves the window out from October 1 all the way to January 31st. That gives you plenty of time, particularly if you're going to have 3 unions, which seems like you're on course to do, to have those 3 different conversations. They're going to be going simultaneously, and you'll meet weekly or every couple of weeks or every 3 weeks with the different unions, and you start off, you kind of meet each other, and then it's going to, things happen. Conversations just take a while, the holidays, this, that, and the other. So that's kind of standard. In fact, most of the schemes that I work with go to usually March 1st, so trying to compromise there a bit. And then lines 160, 162, it's honestly just kind of an odd requirement that said that an employee has to go to their manager before they go to anybody else, and that's just a strange requirement. So it's cut. So with those amendments and those edits, the unions will feel very satisfied about how this has come together. It'll be a nice night at Salisbury. What questions can I answer?
Anybody have any questions? I got one. You struck out under lines 232, 240. You suggested striking out promotional schedules and training.
Yes, because that would be subsumed by the other conditions of employment. So yeah, promotional schedules, again, that's kind of a great example of a thing that fire departments and police departments as rank structures care about. They want a good list of who's going to be the next lieutenant every 2 years. They care about that thing. General employees will care about having the opportunity to see a promotion, maybe be the first to know about it, but they don't have the same, interest in having a real system of how it works. But that, and then, there are lots of topics like that other terms and conditions of employment get covered by.
Any other questions from the council? Ashley, I'll turn it over to you. Your thoughts on these suggestions? Any?
I guess I can speak on behalf of the administration, and Andy can chime in or Mayor if I'm mistaken. but I believe a lot of these we would be comfortable making the changes. I think the big ticket items are still as follows. The other terms and conditions of employment, if we're excluding, this is a compromise. Do we want to add any other exclusions to that? Or do we want to keep it as written with the specifically enumerated subjects in terms of, I think, we've had a lot of discussion, so I need to hear from council on how that needs to be drafted. I think in terms of the duration of the CBA, I think we would like it to be not less than 2, not more than 3, because it is going to be a rather onerous process for administration with having 3 different units we're negotiating with. So for that work, we'd like to have it be locked in for at least 2 years as opposed to 1. And then in terms of the matters subject to arbitration, I know that Meg, the director of HR, spent a lot of time redoing the employee handbook, and the plan that we had thought was to keep that separate and out of the CBA. So at this point, administration is not interested in grieving anything that would be involved in the employee handbook. And in terms of the arbitration itself, some of those factors in limiting the time to try a case, that was just to keep down costs. And then I think the other big point that administration was concerned with is the timelines for negotiating. I think there's a concern that going through January 31st is still a little late in terms of if we end up in arbitration, because that's when you start having budget meetings in January. So I think we would be comfortable going through December 31st. But those are, I think, the 2 big ticket items are for you all to decide in terms of what's going to be subject to bargaining and what will be subject to arbitration. And I overlooked in terms of the arbitration selection. I know that David is interested in the one particular federal mediation conciliation services. And I think we'd like to keep it open to other agencies like the AAA or JAMS.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
I have one question. I'd like to get some information in terms of the arbitration comments. I wonder if the attorney could gather for us what are the average hours of arbitration for the departments you mentioned
The
in a
average,
year?
the average hours of arbitration.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's kind of take the bull by the horns here, Mr. Mayor. I've been practicing for 13 years. I myself have never taken a case to interest arbitration to actual hearing. It's a rarity. It's a tool that keeps the parties on track, but it's actually a tool that's rarely used. It's more the idea that you have to go to a third party that keeps the parties on track. So the idea is, particularly in Maryland and in most of the labor codes we have here, is you do baseball arbitration, which means an arbitrator has to choose either the last position of the city or the last position of the union. So the common example is that you negotiate for 2 or 3 months, and the timeline's getting kind of towards the end, and you got to focus your issues. You agree on a whole bunch of things, agree on 10 things, but there are 3 sticking points. Wages is almost always one of them, right? And so, you get down to a point where the city says we can only afford a 3% raise, and the union says our members are suffering if they don't get a 5% raise, and you stick there. Each side needs to be able to stand by that final number, because that's the number. The arbitrator doesn't select anything in the middle. They select either the 3% or the 5%. That system actually makes the parties be very, very rational, because if you're the outlier, you lose. If you're the union that says, we got to get 20% across the board, you're going to lose instantaneously. You don't even go to hearing that day. And so it keeps the pairs, it keeps everybody pushing towards the middle, pushing towards the middle, pushing towards the middle. So given that reality, and given the fact that honestly most unions and most municipalities don't like to win or lose. Arbitration, collective bargaining is at its best when everybody is solving problems together. They say the union asks for whatever problem they see, the city says, we can do some of that. Well, that's good. You resolve some of it. that is as good as it gets. And if you're having to go to a third party and say one of you is going to be a winner and one of you is going to be a loser, that's a bad day, because everybody in this room has to see each other. They all resent it. If the firefighters go to arbitration, they lose. It casts a long shadow that makes them frustrated with whatever got them to arbitration. If the city loses, they get frustrated with how they got there and how they miscalculated. So there is no, if you do it in a place like this, look, arbitration is only as costly as the jurisdiction. I mean, if you have just a couple issues and a narrow gap, it's a day's hearing. If you get there. I haven't gotten there.
So what is the average? What are you saying? 8?
I'm saying I can't speak to a councilwoman because I have not experienced it. I can tell you that in a jurisdiction like Anne Arundel, where I've second chaired a arbitration, it'll go 5 days, maybe. But in Anne Arundel, that's the only place that I've second chaired it in the last 13 years. So what happens most of the time is you get up to that deadline and the parties say, we really don't want to go to arbitration. How do we bridge this gap? How do we close it? So there's no way to estimate the cost, and also, honestly, it's the cost of your attorneys. If you have an in-house attorney, that's the price of that in-house attorney. If you have arbitrators, are expensive sometimes and affordable others. I mean, honestly, they never seem quite affordable, but their rates vary wildly. So I'm sorry if that's not a dodge, Mr. Mayor. It's just kind of the perspective is that interest arbitration, there's no way to average it. I don't know if you could even kind of pool it over the years in the state of Maryland.
That's not comforting, but that's okay. Thank you.
It ought to be comforting that it's a rarity, that it is a system that works far more often than it fails. And you know the idea behind it is that your employees are not ever going to strike, right? In the private sector, the way employees say we can't take it anymore is they walk out the door. Your employees are never going to do that. They're always going to show up and patch the potholes and put out the fires and do whatever. And when they get frustrated that they're not being listened to, this is the way that they have to get a result. And they're a win, they're a lose. But you know, again, most of the time, nobody wants to win, nobody wants to lose. It's a good tool to motivate the parties, but it is not common.
So I'm going to go down the line. Does anybody have any more questions for Ashley?
I would like to just add my
Sure.
experience, because my firm, we do a lot of employment law, and we represent a number of unions ourselves, and we have been to arbitration in terms of employee grievances a number of times, and we've also, and with another local municipality, we've done 2 arbitrations. One we settled on the cusp of having a hearing, the other one we had a hearing, and that involved the parts of the CBA. So I do think it's an effective tool to try to reach an agreement, but I myself have been involved in a number of arbitrations.
Actually, I have one question. How long was that? Like, how many days?
For the
For the one that you
arbitration,
went
they were normally 1 day.
Okay.
So for grievance arbitration, I should say. So there's 2 kinds of arbitration. There's grievance arbitration, which is the contract says that if you work on Saturdays, you get double pay. And if you don't get paid double pay, you file a grievance and say, why aren't you paying double pay? And that can go to arbitration. Maybe the city says, because you're not in the group that gets double pay. Well, then you go to an arbitration and duke that out. Interest arbitration is the arbitration where the 2 sides are negotiating, they're talking about the groups as a whole, and then you get to, well, we can't agree on a collective bargaining agreement, and that's kind of a different beast. And that's where you get the baseball sort of situation.
So what I was thinking now,
Working on the line?
what's that?
Working our way down the line?
Yeah.
Go on.
I just want to make sure, and we hit through them pretty hard. Each one kind of has a different bullet point. I wanted to make sure everybody was tracking what administration was comfortable with making changes on, potentially say a vote or a discussion on that. You got
kind
them
of
all?
made notes of
Okay. So as long as you're
your
good.
opposition,
Okay.
which I had was the duration was one of them. Of course, I understand the other terms and conditions is one. You had concerns about the arbitrator. and then the average hours of arbitration. Those were the.
In matter subject to arbitration.
That was the terms and conditions.
No,
No,
it's third grade stop one. It's
which one? Which lines? Which lines?
line 428.
Okay, that. Gotcha.
And the timeline too, I think you were hoping
Yeah,
to.
moved to December 31st instead of January 31st. And again, that
Did I-
comes down to negotiation on our when we are doing budget. So that is something that we're either gonna extend it, we're gonna feel it on the other end. So it's
Gotcha.
When's the, not to run things, but I'll tell you, December 31st is a terrible deadline because it'll ruin some holidays. Because a lot of work gets done at the last moment. You're feeling the pressure, you want to get it wrapped up. The parties are a little close. If you're doing that on
So
Christmas Eve,
that's
or
an
Christmas,
added incentive to both sides to get it done before Christmas.
Yes.
well, then I would say make
So-
it December 20th or make it February 1st, but not December 31st is really, the state has suffered through this. Jack will not have said. It's,
Yeah.
if you're on-
I'm
if
just
it's-
wondering
if
how
it's
many
easy.
days we're losing
December 15th.
in there with holidays between Thanksgiving
Yeah.
and Christmas and
Gaining back January makes all the difference. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's a long, quiet month, right?
right.
Where you can do this work.
it's a new year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, people come out of it feeling refreshed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
And you're not
Council.
distracted.
Yeah.
All right. So
David, do you have any objection to moving it up earlier? Starting before October 1?
For 3 units, when is your budget actually submitted? I mean, usually we turn around. Again, when you're in negotiations, you're usually talking a lot with the budget folks, saying, what is your reality about when you got to get your budget finalized and taken to the council? And
Well, it's not even about finalization, it's understanding the impacts that this document, the CBA, will have on revenues that we need to collect to be able to offset increased expenditures. What else is we're going to cut or not be willing to fund in a CIP because we have to have other considerations. We don't want to be rushed on that timeline either. That usually happens. And then we meet with all of our department heads in the February-March timeframe. So not knowing a significant portion of that conversation that could still be ongoing in February because we go into another thing would just potentially be very messy on the back end. So then we would have to have an accelerated budget conversation with council.
yeah, I guess my thought about that is that assumes that like the negotiations kind of go out of control on you somehow. Like
I'm
you
going
know,
to assume the worst and hope for the best. So that's,
Yeah,
that's where I have to position the city. So
I get it, but you as a person who keeps track of the numbers will give authority to whoever in October saying, here's the reality of what we can afford. And the union's going to push on that, but it's only going to go so far. And if the city says, personnel costs can't go up over 5%, your table team's going to try and make that work, right? And then it'd be a strange scenario where I can't imagine a scenario where an arbitrator comes in and says, well, it's going to be twice that increase or anything like that. If the city was very, very stubborn and very, very stingy, you could possibly have a scenario like that. But you plan for it, and it's unusual.
Is there any reason why we couldn't start it right after Labor Day? I think that's what Andy's saying. Maybe
start
moving it up
start in
earlier,
September?
and then that way we could end before the holiday,
15th,
and we would know.
15th.
Yeah.
Again, this is. I don't mind starting earlier, but it's going to be awkward this year. I mean, if you get these groups going, the first contracts take a while. I mean, this is when kind of everybody's getting familiar with each other and everybody trying to figure it out. And again, I think most jurisdictions make it work with a February 1 or March 1. Yeah, I mean, honestly, in Baltimore County, we finished in May. They make it work.
again, I would say I appreciate the comments. You all have to adopt the budget. You have to fill the presentations. You have to go through the process. You have to decide where you want there to be pressure. Pressure during the negotiation period potentially, or pressure figuring out how to, once we've come to an agreement, how that impacts potentially other decision points you have to make.
Right.
So it's really just where you want to, because we can slide this way, we can slide this way. It doesn't necessarily matter at the end of the day. Once we have a decision point, we'll use that formula into it. But when we have department heads meeting with us during budget, they will be advocating potentially for something that may not have resolution yet. So that's just something that we have to take into consideration while we were building our budget to then submit to you by April 15th. So
And the
that's-
flip side of that too is that I know this from the state in particular, revenues and your accounting for the prior year is coming in not until usually January, February, right? You're probably basing your budget on numbers that are coming in and
Projections, right.
you know,
Yeah.
money from the state that comes in and whatever else. So all that is to say, you probably have a better sense of the next fiscal year, honestly, not until probably comes into focus in February or March, really. I don't know your particular rhythms, but that would be kind of typical where they're looking at the past year's experience and thinking about the next year's experience. That crunch period is really February and March usually. So, which helps, honestly, when that's being discussed at the table, that's helpful to have those like up to the minute numbers that roll into February and March. But anyway, I'll take January. Trying to compromise here. December seems very rushed, is my honest assessment. Very rushed.
I do not have a strong opinion either way on that. Again, I've made my piece on where we will feel it as an organization. The further creates further things,
Sure.
but just January 31st or December 31st, I understand that the holiday, I understand that process. December 15th means
What about January 15th? Is that kind of like in the middle? And then if there's any type of arbitration, hopefully that could be wrapped up by January 31st if we do. Just saying, I don't know how long that takes, but
it probably
just,
be
you
30,
know.
60 days. It'll be a while.
Okay.
If something's not wrapped up by the end of January, we'll probably discussing this through March.
Okay.
So we will be in less than a month trying to submit a budget to you all for review with a pretty big. I'm not saying it's a big hole. I mean, it may be very close, but it could be this way or this way. Which, with our budgets, could be $500,000 to $1 million easily, which changes the game sometimes.
yeah. See, our budget has to be submitted by April 15th. That's in our charter and code.
Let me suggest this. How about, as you just said, Council President, January 15th, and then the parties can mutually extend. And it just depends on what the budget, what you all say, if you can extend it in any given cycle. Because sometimes you get to January 15th and you say, oh, we're not even discussing a budgetary issue. We're stuck on, how the promotions in the fire department work, and that's just going to take another couple weeks. And whatever you extend because you agree to extend. That's a
Does that work?
Does that work? I think that's
We
a
have consensus on
compromise.
January 15th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And then we need to spell out that extension piece.
yeah. Again, the
Yeah.
parties can
Okay.
agree to mutually extend in writing something to that effect.
Right, so the next item, let's go ahead and tackle the big one, which is the other terms and conditions. So council, do you have any questions on that, concerns, suggestions? I don't know if anybody wants to start. Anybody a hard no on that?
No, say it
The
again.
terms and
The
conditions.
other terms and
But you
conditions
said
of
something
employment.
after that.
If we're hard no on it.
I'm not a hard no on it.
No.
May I?
Sure.
Because we just said where we stand. The one that is very near and dear to a lot of people, which I understand, that still continues to give me heartburn and HR heartburn, is retirement, and where we land on retirement because of the way our retirement is set up and what we can and can't, maybe should not negotiate. So that's not an exclusionary piece on here that I think allowing that to be negotiated, though, may appear good. It could become very cumbersome and problematic at some point. So that's, I don't know. I don't have the experience, but that can be a difficult one dealing with real estate retirement and stuff like that. So I would caution to. I know that is something that people really want to be able to protect the insurance, the the retirement benefits that they currently have. I understand the desire for that, and I think it's a great desire. So I don't know how to, that's just something that still causes pause for administration and HR, is keeping retirement benefits, and I don't think I've heard a compelling enough argument.
Is it the city's position to continue with the existing retirement plans?
There's nothing on the horizon to not do that, and that's that. I think it's probably the difficulty is.
Is that adding that as an exclusionary piece that's not something to?
Well, if we add it as an exclusionary piece, there's no guarantee that me or the following person doesn't stick to what I'm saying right now.
Gotcha.
At the same time, the opposing argument is if we don't protect LEOPS, for example, then what is to say the next person after me doesn't strip it away? So if we guarantee it,
how do we protect?
That's right. How do you guarantee? So the
protect
question
those
then becomes: if you protect it and add it in there, what else? What other additional benefits are then now, and retirement packages do they now want on top of that? Because that's the starting point of what they have now is guaranteed. Then it's where do you go from there? What is the next thing that you would want to now add that now can be added on top of it? It just becomes more costly. That's all.
Well, I mean, it's
And
that
that's
thing that always hangs on our
Right. Yeah, so that is
the unfunded
again, it
liability.
is crystal ball. I think everybody has the interest in protecting what we have existing right now. The question is, what is the unknown in the future that can become? That's with any of the other working terms and conditions or health insurance. Any of these things, it's the unknown that always creates pause. And as we mentioned before, retirement specifically, it is something that if you already are vested, you have it. We can't take it away from you. It is the person that is, if it's a 10-year retirement, that's in 9 years that we then change our policy. They're on the outside looking in, and I understand how that can be very unfortunate and why someone would want to advocate to bring every protector for that right now. I mean, it makes sense. Again, one of our rules is to make sure that you all understand financially the difficulty of where we may be a year from now.
Thanks, Andy.
Is the retirement system all set by code and spelled out in the city's code?
I don't think it is. Is that something you could correct?
The thing about having retirement in as a topic is all any union can do is ask for something, and honestly, it's the city and the actuaries who always cost it. So a typical ask might be for a fire department, say, to improve the military service credit. You were in the Navy for 10 years, we'll let you have 3 years worth of retirement credit as a way to incentivize you company. The union proposes that at the bargaining table. The city sends that over to the actuaries, which always gets done, and they say, good Lord, this is going to cost $5 million. It's a non-starter. You just say no. If the union's not going to prevail in a benefit that's going to bankrupt the city's not going to say yes to it, right? The actuaries aren't going to support it, and the union's unlikely to ask for it, and ultimately an arbitrator, talk about a third rail they never touch. They're not going to say, oh, well, let me give this very generous pension benefit that could balloon from. We all know that. It's a good thing to talk about because sometimes you want to extend, maybe if that's the hot topic and it's a reasonable price tag, that's the thing the union wants to bet on. They want to go for, that the pension is behind in whatever way. You really can't recruit fire personnel because they can't transfer from another jurisdiction. If that's the hot topic, then maybe that's the hot topic and you have a good conversation about it. If it's too pricey, it's too pricey. I mean, trust me, I face that reality all the time. Those dollars add up real quick. So I would urge you to leave it in, see where it goes. Again, the city gets to say no. The actuaries get to say too costly. An arbitrator could overrule you, but it's a narrow path to get there.
Council, so anybody have any concerns or questions on this particular item?
No concerns, just to me, Andy referenced it a bit to me, it's my priority. I like using the word protection because we are not guaranteed that same members of council will exist next year. We don't know who's going to be walking in. We don't know where Andy's going to be in, 2, 5, 10 years.
Yep.
And I like that extra layer of protection for our workers because they deserve it. So just for where I stand on, lines 232 to 240, that's where I am.
Anybody else? Is everybody supportive of this?
Yes.
Of
the-
adding in other terms and conditions?
Yes.
Yes. I am.
And will that, I want to back up a minute. What about the retirement? That,
It leaves it as a point that they can negotiate.
and that's how his next left.
Correct.
Yeah. And they should have that. I really believe they should have that. I mean, I feel as though that's why we really can't keep workers. Workers are going here, there, and everywhere, they're leaving. And we need something to keep the people here. We need some kind of format for these people to know that we do have their back. And as long as we keep acting like we don't care, then people are going to keep leaving. We have good workers. We have lost a lot of good workers. I know a lot of them that I have seen at other jobs. I'm like, what are you doing here? Didn't you used to work for the city? And when they tell me the story, I'm like, we shouldn't be losing these people. People have been there for years. I stayed on Lake Street. I've seen the city workers. I know a lot of them that have been there for years. And they're gone somewhere else because the city hasn't been fair. Not just saying our administration, but administration before. We need to make these people feel comfortable. We need to make these people know that we have their backs. One way or the other, we have them. Whether they come up for arbitration or not, we should let them know that they do have a voice. And that's true. And that's, I have nothing else to say. If we want good workers, we've got to give them something.
Mr. President, what's your comfort level with that dialogue?
I'm comfortable with it. I want to. The only concern I have, and I don't know if there's something outside of this that we can do to potentially protect retirement for employees, because like you said, we don't know who's going to be here next year or 5 years down the road. That's just my only.
How to find it. I mean, other than changing rules internally and all this pinky promising, there's nothing that I think we can do that that guarantees anything beyond the current mayor and administration and the council, because it has to be adopted through budget or through policy ordinance. So it becomes. This makes it that it becomes.
It's the best we can do.
Yep.
What's your comfort level on the all other terms of employment?
I'm supportive of it.
Okay.
What was that next item?
So on that one, there's. Are you supportive?
Yes,
Okay, so that's
that's
5
fine.
council members that support adding it. Next, I had on the list, and I don't know if I wrote them down in order because I was just scribbling.
That is chicken scratch.
It is.
Look, I
It is.
get it. I get it. I get it. That's a whole mood.
We had.
I think you're looking at duration.
Duration.
Duration. Yeah.
I was trying to figure out which order and I kind of
I
sort
was
of did
trying to
right
figure out his
now.
own
Okay.
right.
Yes. I wouldn't know anything about
The
that.
proposal was 1 year, no longer than 2. We had no indefinite ceiling, so it was brought up at maybe 2 to 3 is what's standard. So we've now put a ceiling. We're okay with making it 2 to 3 rather than 1 to 2. Again, with 3 people, a lot to accomplish. I think 1 is very aggressive. I think.
I was wondering.
2 to 3.
Instead of
but
1 to 2.
I understand if you're only having it 2. Next thing you know, it's 5.
Yeah.
So we would be comfortable adjusting that to no fewer than 2 years, no more than 3.
Okay.
That's
Is
that would be
everybody-
our on-the-fly modification. So
Okay. I mean, that's kind of where I felt, because you don't need to be doing it, number one, every year. That's just, but I think my wife works for Acton, and I think they just did one, and is it 5 years? think, I can't remember.
No.
But 2 to 3 years, is everybody supportive of 2 to 3 years consensus on that?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
All
2 to
good.
3 years.
Yeah.
Next, was the
281 to 281.
Matters subject to arbitration.
matters, okay.
Sorry, which lines were those? I'm going by section.
428.
428. Okay. Okay. I'm just trying jumping around.
Well,
I think this, of all the things on the table, this one gives me the most heartburn. We spent a lot of time creating an employee handbook. We feel very comfortable
Yeah.
with what we've put
Yep.
in there. To then have this ripped out from our control is something I think is, if it's not in the CBA, we should keep it out of the CBA and we handle it differently. So, especially if we just added working other terms and conditions into it. So we are proposing to keep it as is. Maybe the only thing is the employer exclusive representative. Yeah, the exclusive representative, if you see it's underlined, some added, we're okay with that. But we would not be arguing to add or employee handbook into that. We would strike that from the.
Yeah, that employee handbook took a long time. So.
I do agree with you on that,
that's
Andy.
cool. I agree with it too.
Okay, so that one, we're not, is everybody comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
not adding that? Okay. Next was the arbitrator selection, 441, 447.
To us, it seems reasonable to have options and availability. If it comes down to price points or different things we want to do for whatever reason, I would not limit ourselves in this scope. So that striking those to me seems odd. Maybe there's comfort in using a singular one, but having options, I would.
Can I suggest a compromise? Because that's my role here. The typical thing that I see is either American Arbitration or FMCS or one or the other. JAMS is unusual. I mean, if we want to have the option to go AAA or FMCS, fine. Honestly, it's the same groups of folks mostly. It kind of depends on when a code was written, which one they go with. Sometimes they give the option. No strong preference there. And I guess my concern about having options is that somebody has to make the call on which one we're going with. And so I don't want to fight over that kind of thing. It's all of these, by the way, are just, what you do is you have a list of, particularly AAA and FMCS, they train up and they vet individuals, mostly lawyers, but not always, who are familiar with labor disputes, and they just have panels of them. They say that those people have gone to the trainings, those people have had the experience, those people, know how to communicate with the parties, and they literally have a computer system that says, give me 5 names, and they give you 5 names in Maryland, or if it's 9 names, they just kind of spit it out, make sure the parties get their dispute heard, and kind of just have some. Both of them also have kind of some general rules about how it all fits together that fills in some gaps that not wildly different.
I
Are you okay with
So
doing the two?
if we, all right, so because we're adding more things that are potentially open for arbitration, we would like to have the widest selection process on deciding who is going to be potentially an arbiter for the city.
So
Again,
would
that
that
is
mean
us
All 3 of them.
including all
keep
3?
it as would be our argument.
Okay.
For us, that's again, it's
Good.
Perfect.
Is everybody okay with
I'm good
including
with
all
all
3?
I am.
Okay. Include all 3. Is there?
Can I ask how the selection gets made? If the union says we really like FMCS, they're the cheapest and they have the most affordable people, and the city says, we really think this is best suited to JAMS, how do we break that little logjam, I guess, is the question. Do we mutually agree? Do we alternate? Do we, I don't know, something? I mean, it seems like a silly fight to have, but it's a fight that we're going to have. I just assume anticipated to cure it now.
I mean, if you got
I would
something
assume we would want to go with the
where it's
least expensive one to then to begin
Or-
with, since we're all talking about
Bid 'em.
how
or
much money.
alternate. I don't know.
Hey, this is Savila. I'm sorry to also weigh in. Agreed on what David is saying. I've recently been working with FMCS and the AAA. I do think that they tend to be just cheaper, more reasonable options. of the two, FMCS is markedly more reasonable cost, and we do use those in our contracts far more than AAA. I just wanted to throw it out there for a cost saving measure. It is, both of them do very good jobs. I am less familiar with JAMS and haven't heard great things about them, but I will say I've worked with both AAA and FMCS, and really, super solid. So even if you're limiting, I would maybe actually limit one more time, and then if you're limiting based on cost, I would limit to FMCS.
So would you have to pay either one of those
The cost, yes, would be split between the
through one of those, the AAA or FMCS? You would, whichever one you chose, that's who you would.
From that, that's where you would get the panel of arbitrators from, and then from there you would do the selection. I think David's concern is, are we going to fight whether we are going to use JAMS versus American Arbitration Association?
Candidly, JAMS tends to be lots of retired judges who are filling up their coffers, and they charge pretty good money to do that work. So the labor arbitrators tend to be a little more affordable, a little more familiar with things, with these types of issues.
So do we want to go with AAA and FMCS? Is that those the two
Yeah, I think
options?
that's,
I would.
And then maybe
We like all three.
you like
We like all three. I don't want to go into detail on why, but we like all three.
Why did you do that?
and if you want, and then just flip a coin.
No, so
Or
when we have to go into arbitration, if you play this out, are we playing it out based off of positioning who and where we want to land? If administration is deciding that they want to make sure that we are working with an arbitration firm that we feel most comfortable with from an investment standpoint and to favorably, we're going to pick the one that we think at that moment, at that time, depending on the topic, will help us get to that. They will pick who they will argue for that is most favorable to them for whatever reason. So I like options if I'm having to be the one who has to argue for it. And as someone who has been very conservative financially, I am not picking the most expensive person just to pick the most expensive person. So that's what I'm arguing for. Again, if we're expanding the scope of what is now potentially open for arbitration, limiting our ability to then navigate that, I keep some caution.
Here's a way to have options. It's the 5-member panel is kind of a small panel. It's usually 7 or 9. So what happens is you call up FMCS and you say, I need 9 names to settle this dispute in Salisbury. We give you the 9 names, then you prioritize, you go back and forth, and you wind up with somebody. That gives you more options right off the bat on how many potential hearers of this there are. You only wind up with one. The way it works is you usually flip a coin and say, there are 9 names. I'm going to get rid of one name, the city's going to get rid of one name, I'm going to get rid of another name, and then there's one man left standing, or woman. That's the way it works. If you want more options, you can expand the number of names on the list, and then you got more options. It's a nice way to go. 9 or 11 is really kind of typical, so 7 or 9 here, if we're kind of keeping it a little tidier and a little shorter, certainly fine by me to do FMCS, AAA, panel of 9. So that's pretty standard language, honestly. Gives you options.
I am not the lawyer in the room, but for talking to David, who says we never go to arbitration, it seems like a point to be really hammering home if we're never going to get here. So I would argue
I hope it is.
There's probably some other. Why argue so hard on this point if it's not that big of a deal? Because we never get there. So
Leave it like it is.
yeah.
What's that?
Just leave it like it is.
Options. I think we want the options
Yeah, leave it like it is.
section.
Leave it like
I mean, I
it is.
think that's,
So you want to go all 3 on
Yeah,
the list?
leave it like it is.
Yeah, I mean, I
Just
think
go
that's-
from there.
I think it's fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll figure out at any given moment
Yeah.
if it comes to it how which list we choose.
Just
Sure.
leave it like it is.
So be it.
What was is there any other items? Is that it?
I think the time limits, or do we want to try to limit it in order to keep our costs down, to try to, if we're going to do the arbitration, limit it to a day
A day.
as opposed to
8
5
hours.
days? Yeah,
You got it.
which would mean each side would get 4 hours.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not familiar with this, but a day feels really short. But I don't know the ins and outs of
Yeah,
of
that's my
everything.
only
That's my
concern
2
is
cents.
that
I don't.
Well, she's done arbitrations before, so
No, that's
she's
true. That's
narrowing
true.
it
I
down.
just.
You
to
said
8 hours.
I've also been doing research, and it's my understanding that in other areas it's more than just one day. So that's another like thought process that I've been going through is looking at some of the areas that have had success in going through this process, and they typically do more than one day. But if you think that as a cost-saving measure, that's the reasons why.
I do. I mean, I've tried bench trials, and you're locally, and sometimes with a judge, you got to get on the docket. It makes your case presentation very efficient if you have to get in and get out.
But at the same time, Ashley, those aren't technically limited, right? I mean,
No,
let
that
me tell
was
the council,
limited,
I've
yeah.
never seen a limit on the duration of an arbitration. It takes the time it takes. The meter is running for any given union. They maybe have an attorney, often have an attorney.
Well,
the meter is running on the arbitrator.
we do have-
the unions feel the pressure of that cost. Trust me, they do not want to bank. They do not want to spend membership dues unnecessarily on a losing case that's dragging on too long.
There is saving language that says unless otherwise agreed. So, I mean, obviously, the city wouldn't want to shortchange itself either. If we believed it was going to take longer than a day, I think that,
Could we do
rational
2
minds would
days?
prevail.
2, at least 2.
find a middle ground there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the middle ground. I mean, if you go over then.
Yeah.
2 days, but
Yeah,
then
2
if they think it's going to take longer. But also remember, we've got 3 unions
Right.
that
Uh-huh.
each individual one. So, not saying that it would happen, but you could have all 3 go to arbitration at the same time, and it would be 3 different. I mean, that's the
That's the
What
that's
do
the
you
worst.
want?
It's Andy's worst case
What do you want, a
scenario.
week?
No, but no, for each
so
one.
each
This
one
is
would get
like
2 days.
if
Yeah,
this
that's what I'm saying.
was-
See that? Yeah,
if this was
Yeah.
asked me, it would. We're talking just about that
yeah.
Right.
particular one.
Two.
We don't want it to go no more than I guess 2 days.
2 days.
2 days.
Opinion of the council. Okay.
So the way that it would change is up to
8
8
hours.
hours and then
8
2
hours
days at
each.
each. Okay, as written.
Yeah.
Unless, but keeping the same otherwise, unless
Otherwise
otherwise agreed.
agreed, yeah.
It
So
is.
so that was the last item. That was so as we discussed today, the changes with everything we discussed with the labor code today. Do we have consensus from the council to have them move this forward?
Yes.
Ashley's
Yes.
gonna
With the changes.
add
yeah.
everything.
With the changes.
How long do you think you're going to need?
Are you trying to get it on council for next week or the following week?
Ultimately, the goal
when
is
does
to have this
Kevin
done
Would
by
this
August
be the
Be
31st.
resolution.
It'll be an ordinance.
It's
Or
an
is it a
ordinance.
code change?
So the
When
two
do you need it?
Tomorrow, Friday to
I-
Friday morning. Can't put
Okay.
it out after that.
No, yeah, I mean, if we try to.
To even go that far.
Can I make this decision easy? I go to surgery on Friday, so I may not be able to come in on Monday. That's to be able to vote on it again. So.
So you would rather it be the following?
If
the-
we could do it the
First
following.
reading.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
first meeting.
Okay,
yeah.
that makes it easier.
That's why I say let me make it easy
First
for
reading.
everybody. I would like to be here for this, so yeah, if we could make
It'll
it.
be the first reading will be the
And I have
last
no
legislative
promise of
session
how well
of
the
this
surgery's
month,
gonna go,
and then
so.
the second reading will be the first legislative session in August. So
Yeah.
and then
5 Mondays in August.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And would this be a first reading again?
Mhm.
Okay.
First and a second, but it is a code change. Yep.
Okay. Good to know. Just wanted to get a timeline in my head going. Okay. Sorry, guys, to be the holdup this time.
So that was the only item on the agenda today. So thank you everyone for the discussion, and
Great
appreciate everyone who came out and attended. So this is historic.
Yes.
Thank you all.
All right, so we will move on to administration comments.
Don't know. We got comments.
Mr. President?
Jack has something to say.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, I'd like to extend my deepest sympathy to the victims and the families
Yes.
of the senseless shooting that took place
Yes.
last night, just outside the city limits. We just spent a tremendous amount of time talking about issues which pale in comparison to the problem we have in our country. And I ask that we all pray for the families and the victims, and for the soul of the 14-year-old that was killed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Jackson, any comments?
I concur with the mayor. I knew that young man who was murdered. I know several other of the young kids, and I've been on live all day. And I don't usually get on live, but if we don't recognize that we have a problem here, and if we don't recognize that we need things for the children, the young people to do, then we have an issue. There's nothing for these kids to do, and I'm not using it as an excuse for what they're doing. No, I'm not. But we need to come together, a county and a city, and do things. We've got community buildings, centers that are not really being used, and you have to pay to get in them. I've never seen anything in my life like it. But these kids need something to do and somewhere to go. I try to implement a lot of activity for our community. Free events. But we need more. We need more. We need much more than this for our kids. My heart is hurt. I was so upset this morning. I actually got sick when I got the phone call. Something needs to be done. I'm not going to preach no sermon. I'm just going to say, these are our kids. I don't care whether we're black, green, gold, or purple. These are our children. 14-year-old dying? Unnecessary. Unnecessary. And I'll say this again. After 9 o'clock, parents need to know where their children are. Especially when they're that age. They need to know where their kids are. And I'm not blaming the parent for it because I don't know how this took place or whatever. And we need to send our kids to places that are chaperoned by people who care. And not just send our kids out to a party because our kids say they want to go to a party. If you're going to send your kids out, make sure your kids are where they're supposed to be. That's all I have to say. And I'm praying for the families and for Danielle Maddox, whose son was murdered. Xavier.
Michelle.
Not much to say other than co-sign what everybody else has said about it. It's just tragic. It's pointless. It's senseless. I can't even imagine what the parents are going through. And here we had a community that could have been celebrating last night, but instead we woke up this morning to the news, and that's just not the kind of community that I think any of us want. None of us want that. So,
Same sentiments in regards to that. I have a couple of points of interest. Somehow on a work session, I would like the discussion to have some type of independent engineer here to study our parking before the shovel hits the gravel, to look at that issue that continues to be unfolding. The other thing is, I did ask about the scooters. I wanted to know how much they have brought into the city thus far since their implementation, and have a discussion about their safety, the safety of the scooters. And of course, and as always, if you are healthy enough, please donate blood. You never know when you'll need it or someone in your family will need it. And 1 pint of blood can help up to 3 people. So please donate blood.
Jack and April worded it perfectly. Now more than ever, it's definitely a time to hold your loved one close. And I know that following this, we're really going to rally together as a community. A lot needs to be done, and it's going to get done. I have full faith in this council, working with the county, with our sheriff's office and law enforcement officers, to really make sure that our kids are staying safe out there. The one silver lining coming out of today is that we were able to say that we represent the employees of this city. I feel immensely proud that, we were able to finally bring this. This was a conversation you guys were having long before I was ever appointed to this. So I'm just grateful that I was able to be a part of this solution, and making sure that our employees are being fully represented.
I concur with everybody's sentiments. I don't have much to add except just thank everybody for showing up today, all employees. Jack, thank you all for your work. And with that, we're adjourned.